Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today's video is going to be on an old 90-year-old true crime case. And I thought it would be a lot of fun. I mentioned it in yesterday's video that I would be doing one today. Now, you say, who cares about a 90-year-old crime? Well, sometimes you can learn from mistakes, right? And if you aren't careful, history can repeat itself, and it often does. This case that I'm referencing, in case you haven't guessed, is on the Lindbergh baby. And I mentioned the Lindbergh baby along with the Jean Benet little girl going back a week or so, when I was showcasing the Old English Tarot by Maggie Neem. And I had referenced that, if I were to do a true crime reading with this deck, it would probably be for a child. And then I think I mentioned the Lindbergh child and Jean Benet Ramsey. And that's what I'm going to be using this deck for today, but I'll be looking for information regarding the Lindbergh baby, who died in 1932 or 33, but I think it was like 1932. And at that time, it was called the crime of the century. And I will give you some information before we go into the reading. It was definitely called the crime of the century. It was a huge sensation all over the world, not just in the United States. And, Charles Lindbergh was the big national hero. I mean, he was the first solitary individual to fly nonstop across the ocean, right, between the continents. And boy, he was as famous as you could possibly be and still be a human. That's how famous he was. And his child was abducted from his bedroom and eventually found dead, and it looked as though he had probably been dead as long as the kidnapping had occurred. The kidnapping occurred in early March, and the child was found in early May. So it was a couple of months, and or a month and a half or something like that. So the suggestion with how the forensics came up with the idea that it was probably dead from right away, from right at the abduction, and didn't happen afterwards, or if it did, it happened soon after. And so he was huge. He was just the most famous person on the planet. So for this to happen to somebody like that, it's just blows your mind, as these things tend to do today. I mean, people die in car accidents all the time, knock wood. But when Princess Diana, or Lady Diana, was killed in a car accident, like the world stopped. It was like, whoa, because some things about certain people really affect us, as a whole. As individual, we're more touched by the person we care for and loved who passed, right, in a certain way. But we don't always get caught up with other people, right? So I'm referencing these people as somebody that, as individuals that, like so many of us, will, be taken aback by. I hope I made that, clear. Anyway, so the man who went down for the murder of the Lindbergh child was a man named Bruno Richard Hauptmann, a German immigrant to this country. And he and his wife, lived here. I think they were friendly with other German people that they were aware of. That they kept probably close to, as people tend to be when they come to a new country. They find that, they find their like-minded individuals to help them get through, right? So he had that family, was connected with other German families. But remember, in that period of time, Germany was not real popular, It was not a real, the people did not, Americans at that time didn't have a warm fuzzy about, Germans, because they would, experienced World War I, and then, of course, World War II was on the horizon, and Germany was a problem, you know? So, you know, they had to stick together. That's what I'm trying to say. And he would have been a very convenient scapegoat, you know, a very convenient scapegoat for being pinned, you know, or being accused of this crime. Now, I don't like going down rabbit holes. I mean, not rabbit holes. I love going down rabbit holes. I don't like going down conspiracy holes or conspiracy theory kind of things. You know, because if something, you know, if you really have to like go through convoluted what ifs, you know, then it's just, you know, it's not logical. You know, I have a very logical mind, you know. And so I like to listen to facts, and I like to just kind of figure out, you know, maybe you fill in the gaps with your own mind, with the facts that you're made aware of. But at any rate, I'm trying to stick to the facts. So Hauptmann was found, you know, was accused of being the person who was responsible for the abduction and death of little baby Charles Lindbergh Jr. Now, why did they blame Hauptmann? Well, Hauptmann supposedly, he was a carpenter, and I think he was a master carpenter, and yet they associated a ladder, which was ostensibly used to climb the wall to get to the child in his bedroom. And they find this, you know, shoddily made, you know, ladder that was made for the purpose of this, to commission this event, you know. But it, you know, but then again, if he was a master carpenter, he probably would have had a better ladder. But maybe it was just a quick ladder that, you know, he decided to throw together that was cheap and nobody cared about, and it was dispensable, and it wouldn't be, you know, associated with him, for example. Okay, so then there was this like shoddily made ladder that was by the house that supposedly the boards made for the ladder somehow matched what was in Hauptmann's attic, the wood in his attic. It was something like that, so that they were able to supposedly trace the wood from the ladder to the wood in Hauptmann's home. And then another telltale feature for why he was accused of the crime was because there was a ransom feature of this crime, and money was exchanged, and there were gold certificates. Lindbergh, you know, gave them the individuals, you know, gold certificates, which were easy to trace. And so when money started getting spent, they started paying attention, and, you know, Hauptmann had some of this money, and he had enough of it in his possession that it appeared as though if there had been a crime that was commissioned and it was split three ways, he appeared to have like a third of that money. So it really, I mean, it was circumstantial, and he had an explanation for why he had the money. And that was, you know, he had a German friend who I guess was involved in something shady, i.e. the kidnapping of this child. And anyway, this friend went to Germany without the money, left the money behind in a shoebox or something like that, but went ahead to Germany and then died in Germany of tuberculosis and never came back. And then Hauptmann said, well, I went through his box and I saw all this money, so he owed me money, so I was going to spend it. So that was a little bit shady. You know, that was it seems like maybe, you know, circumstantial evidence being enough to suspect that he was in on it, or he was aware, or he had some information, you know. So I don't know. Then there's another school of thought, and this I learned when I was married to my first husband, and he worked up in Hopewell, New Jersey. And we would go up there for, you know, business affairs and events, you know. I would go up there with him. And there were a lot of people from that area who were alive when Lindbergh happened. well, we're going back like 30 some years, you know, so there were people who were still alive who grew up in that area. And the scuttlebutt for many of the locals was that Lindbergh was behind the death of his child. He did something. It could have been an accident and this huge cover-up. And it also could have been the result of some nefarious stuff he was doing, you know, because I think, you know, we have learned through history and through learning that Lindbergh wasn't the guy we all thought he was. Whether he killed his child or not, he was a rather hateful individual and was into some things. And the way he treated, you know, if you read accounts of how he treated other people, was not a nice person, you know. So there's, you know, this school of thought that, and it's known that he played pranks on his family of hiding this child. He's hid the child in like closets in the house and said, oh my God, the baby was kidnapped. Like that was a funny joke for him. And then the whole household would go looking for this child for half an hour before he like admitted that, oh, it was a joke. Right? So he was kind of a strange man, and he was like pro-Nazi, and he, despite the German taking the blame, he took over the show. So because he was so influential and because he was so famous, he, you know, decided that the course of the investigation was going to go by his standard. And, you know, Ellie, step back, you know, and this is the part where if you don't understand how history works, you know, you're doomed to repeat it, right? You know, and they stood back, much like in the Ramsey case, whether or not that family had anything to do with that child's passing, and I'm not implicating that they did, but they kind of took over the way that it should be run too. And so, you know, when law enforcement is not effective, right? And there might not be any malice or ill intent at all, you know, on the part of the individual who's like taken over, like, okay, this is, you know, this is how it's going to be, police, you know. I mean, this is how this kind of stuff happens, you know, and then there becomes room for conspiracy. Becomes room for that because the person who could possibly have been the perpetrator is calling all the shots. Okay, anyway, there are probably lots of other things I'm going to think about, you know, in the course of the reading about the case, and if I see, you know, if it reminds me of an aspect of the story that I haven't yet told you, I'll bring it up. Anyway, let me flip the camera and go into my meditative place, and, you know, what's the question? The question shall be, who was responsible? Who was ultimately responsible for the death of the Lindbergh child? And I'll do my signature spread, 3 rows of 3, and my quint cards at the end. That's what I'll do. That's my intent. Okay, be right back. All right. So on the little Lindbergh boy, who was responsible for this child's death? Who was responsible? Oh, excuse me. So we have the Chariot. Isn't that interesting? You know, if we think of a victor, somebody who's a huge success, a hero, that's the first card that came right out. And you know, I've done readings on this topic before, not on YouTube, but on Instagram. And I think the Chariot popped up there too. This was years ago, but okay, we have 5 of batons. So, you know, if we think of batons as wood, and we're thinking of the context of this story, I mentioned that Hauptmann was a carpenter. Of course, there would be wood. Now, of course, you know, 5 batons suggests, you know, some kind of instability, some kind of complication. But it's interesting that, you know, it's also a thing. And thinking of trouble involving a carpenter too, you know, some kind of complication. right, strength. Now, strength is number 8 rather than 11. Well, this might not have anything to do with Carpenter, but it did pop into my mind. So we have this card representing the 5 of batons is flanked by 2 very powerful cards. We have the Chariot, who is the hero, right? He's when you go to a parade, they're in a car, and back in the day they were in chariots, When they walked on the moon, we had parades, We stopped having those kind of parades with our vulnerable heroes in cars, probably. Having to do with, President Kennedy's assassination, it probably became less of a popular thing to be in a convertible like that, but they'd still go down in, beautiful cars and limousines and stuff like that. So we have the hero and a fortitude card, which I would typically interpret as, just a card of seeing what you're made of, or, hang in there and don't give up kind of thing. But, if I take it by looking at it, I just think of like somebody with a lot of power and a lot of control. So I kind of like take on a different view of what this card might mean in the context of the question, and knowing that we're talking about a hero. So this is a hero who has a whole lot of power, right? And there's some unrest involved. It could have to do, in a social way, or that kind of thing. It could be a reference to the Carpenter, I don't know. Okay, we have Justice underneath the hero. And the Moon, front and center. When we finish the 3 rows of 3, that'll be the card that's front and center. So it's shrouded in mystery for sure. And then we have the star, which is not, it's not shrouded in mystery. Someday maybe we'll know. Justice. Okay, justice will happen. Justice will be made clear. But this has been shrouded in mystery for 90 some years, 91, 2 years, something like that. Wow. So justice will happen. Justice will be made clear. It's not the Sun card, so it's not like in the evening, it's dark, and in the morning we have dawn. But when we have the benefit of a bright star and we're underneath it, it's very enlightening. And I think we could understand this, not quite as if it were the Sun card, but the Sun is a star, and, the star is a card. We follow the stars at night to navigate and find our way, and we wish upon stars. So stars make things come true, stars encompass, our aspirations and help us out when we're scared in the dark, right? We navigate with the stars in the dark. So it seems like it's strongly suggesting that justice will occur, where justice will be made clear. We have another 5. We have we have like 5 batons, which is fire, and then 5 coins, which is earth, So they're not really at odds with one another. They sort of just have no power over one another. Okay, except that they, in their own areas, cancel one another out. And I don't mean to say that they don't have any significance, but I just mean, well, never mind. Okay, the Knight of Swords. Nine of Cups. Wow. Dang. Okay, let me pull the quintessential cards and get it all together. Alrighty. Let me see if I can get these better. So I laid down the quintessential cards. And for the top row, we have Judgment. Second row, we have the Emperor. And the third row, we have Temperance. And then for the final card, we have the Tower. Now, aside from understanding the Tower as a catastrophic event, right, we can also recognize it as a building. And the fact that there was a ladder put up against the wall of the building to take a child, in combination with this image as the final card, kind of makes me think that perhaps a child fell from the window. Maybe when whoever went up the ladder, which I think was described as only being able to hold a person of up to 120 pounds when they analyzed it and, assessed, the quality of the ladder. So if it was only built to hold a 120 pound person, and a man went up there who maybe weighed 160, 170, and then bringing down a little child who was not a newborn infant. He was 20 months old. He was almost 2 years old, and he looked like he had like a healthy little physique. So, somebody's climbing up and down a ladder with a child, right? And if the ladder is not strong enough, then they fell, and perhaps a child fell and struck his head. So maybe this maybe this is the explanation for how the child may have died. But I think very clearly, I don't know. I think that the first card out suggests that it was a hero. Who else in this story was a hero with a lot of power, with a whole lot of power. Now, there was something that complicated that power. There was something that it had maybe overcompensate for, I don't know. Or it took over something. But there was definitely some unrest regarding that individual. And the final card for this individual is Judgment, which kind of suggests that, and then if that's not enough, the next card in the spread is Justice. So, if you're reading it like fluidly or whatever, you get the sense that somebody had to come to terms. Somebody's paid the ultimate price. Somebody paid the ultimate price, to be held accountable for this. It could be, if it's referencing Lindbergh himself, if history is now kind of holding him accountable, because there's enough evidence that, there are individuals who are considered historians and FBI experts who consider that he probably is the one who was responsible. And if that is the case, then he is being justice is kind of coming around, to at least acknowledge that he might have had a hand in this. He probably didn't act alone, or, he had people, if he's guilty, he had people that he was using, I don't know. I'm just saying what the suggestion is and then me putting it together. So then we have Justice again. We have front and center card, as I mentioned, the moon. So, something in total mystery, that for decades, for eternity, it's been held in, that could be another reason for the card being right there. For decades and decades, there was untruth perhaps about this story. And it finally became true that, it finally surfaced. It was, it finally made clear. We see, something being made clear again with Judgment and being held accountable too. And then we have this row is flanked with the Emperor. So he's like a judge. It's not necessarily a religious card, but the judge of humanity, of public interest now, maybe sees him in the light of not who we all thought he might have been. He may not have deliberately hurt his child, but there are stories about him doing crazy things. I mean, he had one of his best friends drink some gasoline as a joke. I mean, he did some crazy stuff, and whether or not he deliberately hurt his child or was responsible for his death, he was someone that we never really knew he was. And I think that, this spread is calling him out, so that he's being called out because of some of these things that he may or may not have done. Okay, we have another 5, the 5 of coins, which I mentioned. We have the Knight of Swords, and we have the 9 of Cups, and then we have Temperance. So what I feel is that he felt he got what he wanted. He got the 9 of Cups, so it had a conclusion for him that made him happy. So he was happy maybe for someone else to take the blame. Or maybe he was happy for someone being held accountable, but it wasn't him, right? He's running away from the trouble, if this could be him being played out, the guy's on a horse, he's not in an airplane, but what do you want from old time art, right? So, he's running away from the 5. So yeah, there was trouble, and he's leaving it. He's avoided trouble, and he's got his happy ending. Now, I understand that his wife was devastated for the rest of her life. She never got over the loss of that child. But, by all accounts, I mean, he was not very attached to the little boy, it seems. And I've already discussed this final card, the Tower. So perhaps he did commission a carpenter, perhaps, to make a ladder. And, there were shady things about that evening because they were staying at their home that was just being built for them. And, but typically they only went there on the weekends because because it was not finished being built yet. So they only went there on the weekends, and they stayed the other days of the week at Anne Morrow's family's house. So, sorry, I had a sneeze. And I lost my train of thought. I don't remember the point I was trying to make. But we brought back to this, card as the final card. So I do think that maybe Lindbergh commissioned somebody to build a ladder. Maybe something did happen. It doesn't necessarily tell me how the child died, but it does suggest that the hero was responsible. Maybe this card could also not only represent strength in a powerful individual, but it could also be suggesting that there was some kind of rough housing. Maybe there was, some kind of rough housing that caused something that hurt the child. Although this suggests the child may have died as a result of falling, But, if the father, if the father had staged some kind of kidnapping hoax, or that went bad, he did kidnapping hoaxes before. So I don't know. I don't know. It gives me the chills, though, to think that a parent could do something like that. But some people aren't who we think they are, and we see it in the news all the time, that parents, are oftentimes responsible for, for some of these crimes. Not always, but it is who, probably law enforcement suspects, But nobody suspected him at that time. And if they did, they kept quiet about it because they allowed him to take over the entire case. It went the way he wanted it to go down. And Yeah. So, we have to explain why how Hauptmann had money. He had to have been somebody who was part of it. If it is a conspiracy, right? If we were hook, line, and sinker into this story and believing that it was this, let me flip the camera. If it were a hook, line, and sinker kind of con job that like, oh, this happened to this hero, and everybody, most Americans didn't know who he was. I mean, this has been uncovered, through 90 years of research, and people are coming to the conclusion that he wasn't a nice person, and he'd done some twisted things. And then there's a whole school of people in all realms of the crime world who suspect he probably had a part in his son's passing, his son's death. And so anyway, I hope you enjoyed this true crime video, and if I remember the point I was about to make, I'll put it down below. And I thought it was a good one. I thought it was a good read, and it's definitely what I've been starting to believe is true. I've been, past decade or so, at least maybe 2 or 3, I've kind of suspected that he was a part of it. And whenever I've done readings on it, I get the same thing, I think it's always the Chariot coming out prominently, that the hero did it. And but it's kind of interesting to see that there is an atonement, or there is a payment, for behavior, because now the tide is turning on him being the hero, and now we're starting to see him in a different light. So I think it's very interesting that the cards are sort of telling that story, and how in the moon being front and center, justice coming before it. Justice was like not clear for decades and decades and decades. If you remember the moon, the justice, and then the moon, so for decades, the truth wasn't known. And then recently, or suddenly, the star appears, and all the information is coming out, which is going to bring justice to the situation, according to the cards. And then the last row, just looking like I described, like he escaped the trouble of the 5s, right? He escaped the trouble, and he got his wish, which is either to have gotten a perp and arrested them and get, finding somebody at fault for the death of his child, and then life he moves on, or that he got his wish and that he got out of that situation unscathed. Okay? And then the final card being the Tower card, suggesting that there could have been a fall. Anyway, until next time, friends, peace and stay well.